across all corporates, listed corporates on stock exchange, for example, and even nonprofits.
And in that context, what if China provides an opportunity for the Korean companies? And geopolitically speaking or economically speaking, Koreans will have to lean towards that direction. So there's, like it's a chessboard. And fragmentation is definitely not a good thing, and it's something that will end up costing all of us.
Avez-vous quelque chose à rajouter? Oui?
Si j'ai bien compris, la question, c'était comment le conseil d'administration peut intégrer les standards éthiques, là, si on veut. Je pense qu'au niveau de l'intelligence artificielle, on est au début de cette institutionnalisation dans les organisations. Ce qu'on voit, c'est un souci éthique, une préoccupation qui est proche de la responsabilité sociale, c'est-à-dire que le concept de responsabilité sociale inclut la dimension éthique comme telle. Là, l'épreuve, comme je le disais, c'est comment ils vont intégrer ces principes-là au sein de l'organisation. Je pense que ça défie. Et je le vois, l'exemple que je pourrais donner pour éclairer le tout, c'est, par exemple, on a la Déclaration de Montréal ici. Il y a des entreprises qui disent « je ne veux pas la signer, c'est trop engageant pour moi ». Donc, ça me retranche dans mes valeurs. Pour le Québec, je suis capable de la signer, mais je suis délocalisée ailleurs. Et là, ça va impliquer que mon engagement que j'ai, entre guillemets, à Québec, soit différent de celui que j'ai dans mes autres succursales ailleurs. Alors là, je me dis, OK, donc on a une éthique à deux vitesses. Alors, je signe, par exemple, je m'engage complètement. J'engage mes succursales qui sont ailleurs. Ça implique un commitment, là, je trouve le mot en anglais est plus fort. Oui, un engagement fort si je signe une déclaration. Ça revient un peu à ce que je disais au début. Est-ce que j'ai une éthique de vitrine, de façade? Alors, je pense que tout à l'heure, on parlait justement de la société civile. Je crois que ça, c'est un rôle majeur que la société civile peut jouer et elle commence à le jouer au niveau environnemental en mettant un stop, vous ne vous établissez pas ici, etc. Peut-être que la société civile peut aussi jouer ce rôle de gardien en disant, bien, on veut un monde différent parce que moi, je vois comme Étienne une question, dans quel monde voulons-nous vivre avec l'arrivée de cette nouvelle technologie? Est-ce que c'est une technologie au service de l'humain ou une technologie qui nous avilit, en quelque sorte? Donc, je pense que ça pose des questions fondamentales et que la pression externe, à mon avis, va être déterminante dans son rôle-là, puis qui peut faire pencher la balance d'un conseil d'administration en disant « Oh, là, j'y vois un risque pour ma réputation. Je ne me montre pas selon ce qui est attendu. » Donc, je pense qu'on est à l'aube de quelque chose à l'égard de ça. Et l'avenir nous le dira ce qu'il en est.
Bien, en effet, je pense qu'on a tous connu l'ère où est-ce que les banques n'avaient pas de gestionnaire de risque. Et puis maintenant, it's a given. We all have risk managers in banks, right? So, KPMG a dit que être un spécialiste en éthique, AI Ethics and Social Impact Specialist was one of the 5 jobs of the year. Comment ça va s'institutionnaliser, comment ça va se concrétiser au sein des entreprises, ça reste à voir. Et il nous reste comme à peu près 3 minutes. Alors peut-être a little 30-second conclusion about how these ethical guidelines will help us achieve better AI and make sure that it has positive impacts in society. Just everybody's 30-second concluding remarks. Jared, we'll start with you.
Sure. I think just a concluding remark, I would focus on the necessity to collaborate and not reinvent the wheel. For instance, information ethics has been looking at these questions for over 20 years, and there's a plethora of research done. Let's not forget the research that's been done, and let's not necessarily co-invent. We can work together and collaborate, and I think it's important to understand the entirety of the realm that we're dealing with and everybody's piece in the journey.
Karina?
Yes, so I think we need to manage our expectations, and I think that consensus is overrated. Because we can't even agree on what we should eat. You know, should we be vegan or keto? Like, we can't agree on that. So how can we agree on something as complex, and do we need to agree? You know, can we have one standard for the whole world? And I think we take those ideas in our legal systems, such as civil law, where we have one book and all the rules are in there. And we're trying to do the same thing with AI, where we want to have all the rules and they don't change for 20 years, and that's what we follow. And I think we have to think of system as a whole and think about how we can integrate different ways of thinking and how it's all right to disagree on them and how we can have multiple standards as long as we do keep in mind that I think that question is why is really important. You know, why are we doing this? And I think we need to be doing this to make ourselves more happy, to make sure as many people as possible, all the people have access to happiness and health and services. And I think governance is also really important in that, because who makes the decisions? You know, in countries where they're more worried about their borders, that's where the funding goes, protecting the borders. In countries where corporations are more interested into selling goods, that's where the funding goes. But when does funding go into developing technologies to providing essential services to people in remote communities who don't even have cell phone signals or a good stable internet? And I think to do that, we absolutely do need a diversity in decision making. And one type of diversity we don't think about a lot is the socioeconomical diversity. You know, we really need people from all walks of lives to have decision power. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. What's the prize that you just got yesterday, Karina? Sorry, I have to show off about it, but I can't remember what the name of the prize she just got is.
I'm just a finalist. I'm a finalist at the Mercuriade.
Oh, les Mercuriades! Alors, une belle main d'applaudissements pour Karina, finaliste. OK, concluding remarque, Lise.
Ma remarque finale, bien, moi, je vais revenir avec l'idée d'avoir une gouvernance collaborative. Je crois que les enjeux sont tellement complexes en ce moment avec la nouvelle technologie. Donc, avoir une gouvernance collaborative qui va être axée, à mon avis, puis ça rejoint un peu ce que tu disais, Karina, sur un apprentissage collectif. Je crois que c'est le moteur d'avoir un apprentissage collectif, puis cela va commander une responsabilité conjointe, mais en même temps un engagement réciproque. Et là, je crois que c'est là que va se jouer ce défi.
Intéressant. Merci beaucoup. Dongwoo, your concluding remark?
Yeah, so I agree with Karina that there cannot be one single consensus. There'll be lots of many different disagreements and agreements here and there. So I hate to be the guy who is quoting like other people, like especially like ancient Chinese philosophers, but I mean like let's compare Plato and like the Book of Changes in China. Plato wanted had the idea of the ideal. So here in the West, we think of a text or a goal, and we want to achieve that, approximate that ideal. But in case of the Chinese ancient philosophy, it is based on the notion that the change is constant. We have no idea what it's going to be, but you need to be able to manage it. So I think that's a good approach to AI governance. We're not going to agree on all of things, but we need to keep the channel of conversation open in order to manage differences, because otherwise, those manageable, the differences that could have been manageable could turn into a crisis, could turn into a conflict. And maybe that's something that we can avoid in a realistic manner.
And my concluding remark will be to be able to partake in a dialogue, you need to feel empowered enough to to be there. I call a lot of organizations to come to this conference so that we can have this dialogue. And I often get the reaction is like, artificial intelligence? Vous êtes trompé de numéro de téléphone, non, moi, mon site web ne marche pas là. Alors, pour pouvoir participer au dialogue, c'est très théorique, tant qu'on ne finance pas vraiment la compréhension des enjeux. Donc, il faut financer l'éducation. Donc, ma conclusion, c'est parce que ça va être dans le panel demain. On va parler d'intelligence artificielle, d'argent et d'impact social. Ça fait partie de l'éthique, l'argent. Puis c'est politique aussi. Il y a beaucoup de choix politiques. Il y a le budget qui est annoncé aujourd'hui. Ça fait peut-être partie de l'éthique de l'IA. J'ai hâte de voir qu'est-ce qui va en sortir, c'est ça. On va aller regarder les nouvelles ce soir. Merci beaucoup. On va ensuite passer au prochain panel qui est « Est-ce que l'IA est une menace à la démocratie? » Alors, j'inviterai les panélistes qui sont sur le prochain panel à s'approcher, peut-être proche de la table ici. Merci beaucoup, Dong-Woo Kim, Lise Langlois, Karina Kesserwan, Jared BLB. Thank you, Jared, so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Jared, Derek? Derek, is that you? Okay, wonderful. Okay. Derek, this way. Êtes-vous prêts pour la prochaine table ronde? C'est une courte table ronde. It's not lunchtime already. We have a really exciting panel starting. Is AI a threat to democracy? Are we going to survive? On a un bref mais excitant panel de 30 minutes et puis ensuite on peut manger, je vous le promets. Presque. Je ne sais pas si j'ai assez de lunch. We like to live life excitingly. You might have a lunch, you might not have a lunch, we don't know. Non, toi tu manges pas, je t'en donne pas. Est-ce que tout le monde est revenu? Catherine, je pense que ça prend un autre coup de sirène, là. Okay, I know we're making you work hard, but this is... Okay, we almost have everybody. On vous a tous? Bon, alors, chut, c'est pas poli. On parle pas pendant qu'il y a du monde là-bas. Chut. Je voudrais vous présenter à nos trois panélistes. I will do it in English. Everybody is in English, so I'm going to do this one in English, okay? So Derek Ruth is, everybody will self-introduce better than I can do, but Derek Ruth is here today because there's a really exciting research being done on AI democracy, and he's part of that workshop. He's also the director of the Center for Cultural and Social Data Science at McGill. And they have this really interesting multidisciplinary perspective, and so that's why I invited him. I'm just very curious to see what he's going to say today. Paola, my pronunciation of family name, Ricorte? No, how do I say it properly? Do you have a microphone? Yeah, here's the microphone. Ricorte. Ricaurte. Okay. So Paola is here today. You've traveled from Boston, but you're with the University of Monterrey in Mexico and Berkman Klein Center, kind of collaboration between the two. And Naresh Singh is here today from Ottawa. So, and I was introduced to Naresh by Carole Piavoisin. So for those who were there here last year, she referred to me to Naresh because she knows how much I care about social economic inequalities, the risk that AI might increase that. And Naresh has an extensive experience on fighting poverty. So this is a fireside chat. They will introduce themselves, and then they'll ask each other questions, and then we'll try to save a little time for questions from the public. But this is 30 minutes. Just tell us, is AI going to feed democracy? Yes, no, and why? Off to you, Derek. You can self-introduce.
Thank you. Is this on? Okay. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. As was mentioned, I'm a professor of computer science at McGill University. I run the Center for Social and Cultural Data Science. I also run a not-for-profit called Charitable Analytics, which is focused on data science for social good. And so actually in all three of these things, what I'm very interested in is understanding how we need to build better systems in order to address problems that we actually observe in the world. I think one of the challenges that we often have is that when we try to build AI, sometimes we simplify problems or sometimes we modify the problems in order to make them something that we can tackle, and we maybe lose sight of the actual problems that we're trying to really solve. And so in all of these different things, that's one of the big questions that I'm engaged in various ways. And so when it comes to AI and democracy, one of the ways that this sort of connects is when we start thinking about the online experience and the extent to which we are building the kind of experience that is going to support democratic processes. One of the ways that I kind of think about framing this problem is that we have a very archaic way of talking about the internet. We say I'm connected to the internet, or I'm going to hang out online, and we make it sound like this very neutral space, like the internet is like a room, a static room that you go into. And that was true. Like, that was true back in the 1990s. Like, all pages were static. There was no deep web. Like, it was super simple. You would go hang out online. And the reality was, online wouldn't do anything to you. But with the rise of AI, as well as a variety of other techniques and technologies like A/B testing, but AI in particular, it has transformed the online experience from a neutral space, one that is basically inert, into one that is actually reactive and potentially even prescriptive. And I think that this is really the heart of where, when we think about sort of online information ecosystems, which is what I work with as a computer scientist, it's the place where I think the interface where we find the most conflict between artificial intelligence and democracy. And so as a computationalist and as a computer scientist, sort of the platform that I take on this is that in order to build more thoughtful, reactive, engaging interfaces, from everything from your feed to the way that we are behaviorally targeted, we need to actually get more interdisciplinary thinking and training involved in that. And what that means, I think that means two things, and this is very much at the heart of the center and my work as a professor and the charity, is we really need to make sure that we are training technical folks with a much keener understanding of the kind of social impacts, how to think about the problems that they're actually tangling with, trying to solve, potentially creating. And we also need to make sure that we're empowering domain experts, people who can think about society, people who think primarily about political systems. We need to make sure that we are empowering them to be engaged in the design and the execution, the evaluation of these systems.
Thank
So
you.
I'll stop there.
Yeah, perfect timing. Paola.
Hi, I'm Paola. I'm Mexican Ecuadorian, and I'm very happy to be here. I have some notes because my English is not that good. So for me, well, the background. I am an academic, but also I belong to a digital rights organization in Mexico, and I'm concerned with how can we understand socio-technical systems within a framework of feminist theory, decolonial theory, and intersectional approaches. And I will try to explain what does that mean. So we know that the socio-technical context has changed, and also our ideas of how democracy should look like. So what does it mean, democracy in times of AI? For me, the main question is that we have to think about if AI is supporting the idea of having a political system where power is in the hands of citizens, or if it's helping powerful people to have even more power. I would ask you because well, we are here in Canada and Western country, and also country with a lot of richness. Is the AI industry in charge of democracy? And I think that power asymmetries are reflected in our social-technical systems. As we've heard before in the previous talks, the framework is important. And I would say that we need to reframe the problem. Democracy, for me, is imperfect if it's not oriented to fight against injustice and fight against structural violence. And that means how can we understand how domination and power and violence is exerted over other people's bodies and territories. So if my question would be, are we conscious about how this violence is reproduced in our society and in our societies, and in this case, how our socio-technical systems are reproducing violence over other societies? If we want to fight power asymmetries, of course, if we are here, we are the good people, right? We are the good guys that want to fight injustice, inequalities. But maybe we cannot agree about the root of the problems, and also we probably won't agree about how can this problem should be addressed. And that's something that was said also before. So we should ask, what are the roots of the problem? Is that power concentration? Is patriarchy? Is capitalism? Is colonization? I recently wrote a paper about how data-centric regimes can be understood as a new form of colonization of thinking, being, and feeling, for example. Going back to the idea of other ways of understanding reality and other ways of being, like on Earth and our relation to nature, for example. So put it in a democratic language, are we giving people a choice? Because freedom of choice is important. Are we promoting autonomy of people, agency? Are we considering all the people, especially the most vulnerable? Are we working to revert power concentration in all its forms? And someone asked about priorities. If we work for the most vulnerable communities in our societies, we should also think about changing the framework and thinking about a design justice framework. Within this framework, one of the main ideas is nothing for us without us. And some people, some scholars talk about data colonization, as I said, data justice, algorithmic justice. And how does it relate to a way of thinking about the development of AI systems within the framework of justice? And I am a professor, and for me education is also relevant, so are we working with marginalized communities to understand the role of emerging technologies in our societies and in their lives? Are we working for the right to a good life, like for everybody, not for people in our countries, but for people everywhere? Are we thinking about AI and not only in the phase of design, but also are we thinking about AI and data supply chain? Do these chains reproduce exploitation? Are we considering the rights of nature? Are we habilitating conditions for the vulnerable to make decisions in every phase of the process, not only on the design, but also about the future and the development of these socio-technical systems? And that means not only participating in the decision-making process. Are they able to design by themselves these socio-technical systems? So I think that we need to think in every step and every phase, or in every moment of the process, and design, deployment, and use, every step that can reproduce domination through data or, for example, the development of a socio-technical system in general. So the responsibility of the designer is just one side of the puzzle or one part of the puzzle. We also need to consider governments, institutions, the institutions that we need for that, regulation, and of course, citizens. I would like to finish.
That's okay. You have to keep some stuff for the question. You used on your profile techno-feminism. So after when Naresh is finished, that's one of my questions for you. We need to define what's techno-feminism. But Naresh, up to you. I think you're very much into the how to make things happen. So I'm looking forward to hearing that presentation.
Thanks. I was trained as a natural scientist in environmental sciences. And about 2 or 3 years after that, I abandoned my training and started to work on the field of economics and politics. And the reason was that I found that natural scientists were working on the symptoms of the problem, and that the cause really lay in poor economic and politics, poor economic decision-making. And so for the last 3 decades, I have been involved in policy work, how to bring the voice of the poor into the policy process, and how to bring the reality of ecosystems into that policy process. One of the most difficult socio-technical problems I have worked on, and I believe the world has ever faced, has been climate change. I say that because I believe we have a lot to learn from the last 3 decades of work on climate change in which I've been involved in politics, economics, ethics, democracy, capitalism, and so on. It's all there in the climate change debate. And not only that, work at the levels of communities, provinces, countries, and among countries internationally. Right here in Canada, the debate between the provinces and the federal level is good testimony of what we can learn and what might happen in the case of AI. I've had the privilege of working at very senior levels in the United Nations, as well as in the federal government of Canada. I've worked in about 75 countries around the world, and I have learned a few things along the way. And I want to draw that, and if the slides were to come up, I will wrap it up with a few slides afterwards.
No pressure.
But first, let me just share with you these quick lessons. Right, I will talk to the 3 slides I have in a minute. The 3 lessons I've learned along the way that is relevant to AI and democracy. The first one is that the real issue is an issue of power. And we use the word empowerment loosely, even today. The reality is that empowerment is a nonsense word. I studied this issue and wrote a book on empowerment for sustainable development. And after that, I realized that empowerment really never happens, in the sense that those who have power will give power to those who do not have, well, not willingly. And therefore, the only thing that can happen, and has happened in the history of human civilization, is self-empowerment. People will have to take power and take control. And I think that is central. That's the first thing. Now, how do we do a self-empowerment process? And there are 4 steps. You have to form groups, like we have heard before. You have to articulate issues, like we are doing now. And then the big step is contestation. How do you get that space in order to make change? In order to do that, when you're powerless, and I wanted to extend this debate into the developing world as well, power has to become a positive-sum game. I believe that the tradition of thinking of power as a positive sum, that is, that you have to lose for me to gain, or that you have to be wrong for me to be right, we have to change that conceptualization. And that is, in fact, at the heart of winning for those who are deprived in a case of democratic institutions. And finally, the other lesson that I have learned along the way is that we live in a world of uncertainty. We humans tend to believe, and this is perhaps consistent with the last panel, which talked about the Chinese philosophy of change is constant. We live in a world of uncertainty, of black swans. The president of China recently talked about white rhinos. Well, black swans we all know about, where we have surprises. And we have not yet talked about how to use complex adaptive systems to understand that which we cannot predict. And I believe that the future of AI is not predictable. While we try to say, and most of the presentations I've heard today seem to want to suggest that we know where this thing is going. While we know a bit about where it's going, I would argue that really where we end up, we don't know yet. Like we didn't know when we got computers that we would end up with the internet. And so we would have to manage this and recognize self-organization, adaptability, non-linearity, and all those principles of complex adaptive systems. So those are a few lessons I've learned along the way. And
it's the big green button.
Yeah, this one works. So let me quickly say that what I've heard, and I prepared these slides before I listened this morning, but I think we have 4 groups of questions that people have been talking about. The first one is questions of governance and technology management. So that's about safety and security and prevention of harm, the mitigation of risks, design and development, and all of that stuff. So that's one, and we have heard all about it already. Then we can talk about ethics and law and democracy, which can be put another way, about values, democracy and human rights and the rule of law, And I've worked a lot on these issues, and we've heard a lot about that this morning as well. So my main interest is how do you take these two broad sets, A and B, and apply them to fight things like poverty, what will happen to jobs. The Sustainable Development Goals, I have used a lot. Sustainable Development Goals is the overarching set of goals established by nations of the world at the UN, and I think that it provides a good framework for us to begin to think how to guide AI in support of these SDGs. So we are talking now of fighting poverty and equality, hunger, inclusive growth, health, education, job creation, and so on. Of course, there's a lot of debate about whether AI will destroy jobs or create jobs, and I think it will do both. If Accenture can automate 40,000 jobs and don't lose a single job, I don't think it's doom and gloom. It will have to do with retraining and maybe universal incomes and so on. And then I think the key challenge in this AI and democracy is really a challenge between democracy and capitalism. And we tend to conflate these two in most Western countries, including here or in the US. They're not the same thing, as we know. The job of capitalism is to create capital, nothing else. The job of capitalism is not to distribute wealth, and we have to understand that. The problem has been that at that interface of capitalism and democracy, in the US especially, but even in Nordic countries or in Canada, democracy loses out. So our challenge has to be how to both democratize AI, but also help use AI to help build democracy in its fight to balance with capitalism. I have no problem with capitalism, except that it does not create enough capitalists. So let me just wrap it up quickly now. The big issue for us, I think, is the area of ethics, values, and laws. And the ethics part of it is about those voluntary principles, standards, and guidelines that people will adopt. And like we heard, many people are already beginning to adopt that. The Europeans have articulated a whole bunch of principles. The government of Canada has done that. And even Google has put out a set of ethical principles that they will use. So the first question that I pose is, while Canada has, and is the first country in the world that has a national strategy on AI, how do we begin to query that policy, to query that strategy, to see if it is good enough, and beyond that, to use Canada as a leader to begin to help the developing world in this field? So then we need to begin to move from what we see happening now. So the first point, and this is to wrap it up, issue is the world was successful in reducing poverty. From 1990 levels, we were able to reduce extreme poverty by half before 2015. So that was one major goal. But the next rungs of poverty is going to be much more difficult. And I have a feeling that AI could be helpful. So I have been spending time more recently working in 3 sets of countries. One has been in emerging economies, one has been in low-income countries, and the third set has been in countries like that I'm working in currently, like Yemen and Iraq, and the countries affected by the Syrian crisis. So the big question for me, and I don't know the answer yet, is can we begin to think about how disruptive technologies like blockchain, like AI, will be able to work in these countries? I have a strong feeling that our country, Canada, can play a leading global role. And so I urge us to begin to think now how to use the wealth that we have, the democracy that we have here, in order to build on what we have domestically, but now reach out through our feminist international aid policy to begin to help the world.
Woohoo! Okay, I'm getting an internship in your office. I just want to loop back maybe to Derek, because there are some technological solutions, and I know maybe you're exploring some of those. So from the perspective of a data scientist, a computer scientist, listening to this, what kind of solutions do you see emerge in about 2 minutes? Sorry.
Well, actually, I think one of the things that really struck me as I was listening to the other remarks that were made was how broad our interpretation of AI can be. So like when I'm thinking about AI, and I would never claim that this was the whole scope of it, but when I think about AI, it's largely within the context of online environments. And we know that can have a tremendous impact on democratic processes, both informal and formal, everything from the way that collective action arises, to the way that population becomes informed, to the way that campaign ads are delivered. And so these can shape behavior. In some sense, I would take your question, I would actually pass it on to the panelists, which is to say, if we go beyond information ecosystem platforms, what do you see as being sort of the ways in which AI gets applied that poses a danger or an opportunity for democracy?
Should I?
Is that okay for me to pass it on?
Yeah, if I were to lead off, for me, the first big issue is what I call, or somebody else called, the frightful five. If we were to have power concentrated in the hands of these 5 corporations that are currently controlling AI, whether we like it or not, we are talking about Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, and so on. Unless we are able to work with these corporations, while on the one hand we don't want to kill their creativity, on the other hand, the democratization of that power, how to share it. And I think this is the big concern that Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking had when they came up with this doom and gloom scenario in which they said about AI could destroy the human race. I think it is the democratization challenge of capitalism. That's the key.
Paola.
Well, for me, well, I was asking, is the AI industry in charge of our democracies? And I think capitalism, it is a problem. I don't think that we can...
It's also a solution, right?
I'm not sure. I'm thinking more about challenging our assumptions and thinking in post-capitalist societies where we don't need these superpowers to let people live a better life. And I don't think this is compatible with the way that we are understanding capitalism and its relation to democracy. So for me,
it's a time for a new political system, or?
Why not? That's the problem, that they have captured our imagination and we cannot think about a different way of living and being together in society within a world where we don't have to dispossess and dominate others in order to succeed. So.
Can I add quickly that
yes, please do.
In the slides, I distinguish between different types of capitalism. And I think we need to talk a little bit about that. So we have what has been called turbo capitalism, or unfettered markets. So we have the kind of US type of capitalism.